The fascinating world of history is full of surprises. One lesser explored area is the many historical figures with syphilis. We've put together an illuminating list of these famous people, shedding light on the challenges they faced, how they handled the disease, and the impact it had on their lives and careers. STDs, or sexually transmitted infections, have existed for a very long period. Actually, many of the people in your history textbooks likely had some form of sexually transmitted disease, STD, especially syphilis, gonorrhea, and more recently, AIDS. These illnesses can cause a variety of issues in between, such as dementia, disorientation, itching, painful urination, heart issues, and more. They can also range in severity from unpleasant to fatal. Think about the possibility that Adolf Hitler suffered from syphilis, which might have explained some of his grandiose thoughts, paranoia, and outbursts of anger. Whether you have an STD or not, it is astounding to consider how they could have altered the path of history and affected your own life to this day. Napoleon Bonaparte had syphilis. There are probably few more charismatic leaders than Napoleon Bonaparte, the self-styled Little Emperor. He came to power during the turbulent years of the Reign of Terror, when the guillotine and Maximilian's policies had set the French people against one another and the nation had spiraled out of control. In addition, he was a gifted diplomat who knew how to work with leaders in France and other nations, including Italy, and who was aware of the concerns of the populace and society at large. His desire to push boundaries much beyond what most leaders would ever consider set him apart from other leaders of his era. Napoleon became the French state's consul and military commander before announcing the country's empire in 1804. At Notre Dame, he was crowned emperor, and he is renowned for having taken the Pope's crown and worn it on his head to essentially crown himself. He proceeded to enlarge the French Empire in a manner that would not be surpassed until Hitler started capturing territory in the 1930s. Napoleon was most likely not purposefully poisoned, as some have believed, but rather died from arsenic poisoning. Rather, the evidence points to the Little Emperor having syphilis, for which arsenic was the treatment of choice back then. The medication that was administered to them was lethal, just like it was to others whose STDs were treated with mercury.
Napoleon was adulterous and slept with many women, which put him at risk of having syphilis. The relationship between Napoleon Bonaparte and his wife Josephine de Beauharnais has been hailed as a love affair for the ages, but it was anything but a perfect picture of selfless devotion. While it's true that the French leader's countless letters to Josephine overflow with intense declarations of infatuated love, their relationship was marred by frequent adultery, and their marriage ultimately ended in divorce. Despite the other women, it seems Josephine continued to control his heart. "My mistresses do not in the least engage my feelings. My mistress is power," he wrote in 1804, the same year the couple were crowned Emperor and Empress of the French. However, shortly before the coronation, Josephine discovered Napoleon in the bedroom of her lady-in-waiting Elizabeth de Vaudey, and the arguments began again. Napoleon threatened divorce once more, this time on the grounds that Josephine hadn't produced an heir. It's been noted that his affairs led him to have syphilis.
Henry VIII of England and his wives were never treated for syphilis, despite the rumors. For much of his life, Henry VIII was a remarkably fit and healthy individual who was athletically inclined. However, by his mid-50s, he weighed over 400 pounds, was covered with infected sores, and was barely mobile. Syphilis has always been one of the explanations for Henry's demise, a theory obviously based on his promiscuous lifestyle and subsequent physical and mental issues, which made him extremely paranoid and irritable in the second half of his life. Because Henry VIII and his wives were never treated for syphilis, this diagnosis has remained merely a possibility. There are many other possible explanations for his eventual passing, including diabetes, Cushing's syndrome, McLeod's syndrome, gout, and cancer. Henry VIII passed on January 28, 1547, bedridden, his room fouled by the smell of his ulcerated legs. Magic Johnson's skill in the basketball game gave rise to his moniker. He was one of the best basketball players in America in the 1980s and retired from the LA Lakers in 1991 after receiving a positive test for the HIV virus, which causes AIDS. The most positive development for the AIDS community may have been Johnson's surprise revelation, which surprised not just his supporters, but also a large portion of the United States. The illness was often disregarded in the 1980s, despite being rife in inner cities and thought to be a gay man's disease. Magic Johnson's declaration brought HIV and AIDS to the forefront, as these pandemics were wreaking havoc across the nation and beyond. Later, in 1992, Magic Johnson participated in the Summer Olympics in Barcelona as a member of the U.S. Dream Team. He chose not to play basketball professionally again, though, due to the stigma attached to the illness. Since then, the professional basketball player has pursued other endeavors, such as managing many real estate holdings, producing multiple books, and opening multiple Starbucks locations. In addition to being the owner of Magic Johnson Holdings, he was inducted into the College Basketball Hall of Fame in 2009. President John F. Kennedy. There are numerous reasons why John F. Kennedy is remembered in history. Despite worries that his loyalties would ultimately lie with the Vatican, he was the first Catholic president, which was a historic achievement in and of itself. Averting a total nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union amid the Cuban Missile Crisis was his main achievement. His 1963 killing sparked several conspiracy theories about an inside operation, and the incident continues to be a source of political mistrust to this day. Still, by today's standards, JFK's numerous health issues, including an STD he contracted as a teenager, highlight the likelihood that he would never have been elected president. The president's body was unable to produce corticosteroids due to Addison's illness. Therefore, he had to inject himself twice a day. Despite being informed by medical professionals that the experimental operation for Addison's disease could be fatal, the 37-year-old man decided to undergo it. Though most people were unaware that he had persistent back discomfort, X-rays that appeared after his assassination showed that he had significant osteoporosis. Because the family destroyed a lot of his medical documents, it is unknown what STD he had. Christopher Columbus may have infected the New World with an STD. Christopher Columbus has a complex legacy, something that few men possess. He is renowned for having found the New World and facilitating trade between Europe and the Americas. Slaves and the goods they produced, like as sugar and tobacco, made up a large portion of that trade, nevertheless. Columbus has a day named after him to honor his landing on the island he named Hispaniola, despite the fact that the Vikings landed in present-day Canada 500 years before he set sail. Even though he felt that God had approved of his mission, Columbus brutalized the Aboriginal people he came across. Additionally, he and his crew are said to have given them diseases to which they were not immune. In fact, diseases carried to the New World by European settlers killed up to 90% of the indigenous population. The current question is whether Columbus may have introduced an unidentified sexually transmitted disease, STD, to the native population. It is impossible to know for sure 500 years after his passing. He did, however, exhibit traits of what is now recognized as writer's syndrome, which is brought on by a few STDs. On the other hand, some contemporary medical experts who are investigating the possibility that he carried sexually transmitted diseases to the New World think he contracted writer's illness as a result of food poisoning. Actor Maurice Barrymore went insane from syphilis. In 1849, Herbert Blythe, also known as Maurice Barrymore, was born in India to a British East India Company employee. His parents had intended that he would study law at Oxford, where he was sent to receive an education. To their dismay, though, Barrymore followed his passion and built a family dynasty in the theatre. His granddaughter, Drew Barrymore, became a success for her work on Entertainment Tonight when he wed Georgiana Drew Barrymore. Maurice never made it big, although he did play a lot of supporting parts and even gave scripting a shot. But his granddaughter, who has spent her entire life in the spotlight, inherited his flair for acting. Syphilis, one of history's worst enemies, might have put an end to his performing career. In 1901, when he was 52 years old, a fit of insanity that occurred during a performance during which he made a blasphemous attack on the Jews caused a diagnosis. He spent the remainder of his life in institutions where he fought the caregivers in a dramatic manner, without acting, and even made an attempt to strangle his daughter. Fortunately, granddaughter Drew is not known to have the disease that incapacitated him. Howard Hughes had syphilis. Before becoming one of the most famous recluses of his time, the billionaire oil mogul, aviation enthusiast, and Hollywood producer, Howard Hughes was known for producing provocative films and womanizing in his free time. Born into a wealthy Texas oil family, he used his inheritance to create movies, some of which, like Scarface and Hell's Angels, are considered to be classics and still have their cult followings. He also used his money on flying, founding his aircraft company and even setting some of his world records in aviation during the 1930s. He lived a solitary life for the most of the remainder of his life after an airplane accident in 1946. Actresses like Katharine Hepburn and Ava Gardner, who are regarded as the epitome of beauty and femininity, were among the stars Howard Hughes dated. Joan Crawford was the one woman he was unable to win over. His love adventures caused him to get syphilis, which worsened until it rendered him psychologically unable. In addition, he suffered repeated concussions to his head and was suspected of developing a heroin addiction in his final years. He eventually overdosed on drugs and died of renal failure. Syphilis may have caused Al Capone's death. Nobody or anything more than the infamous mobster Al Capone represents the activities of the Italian mafia in the United States. He operated in the early 1900s during Prohibition, when it was strictly forbidden to sell or consume alcohol. People were naturally more inclined to join gangs as a result of their desperation to obtain alcohol. Let us introduce Scarface, also known as Al Capone, who accumulated an estimated $100 million in wealth. He is thought to be responsible for the notorious Valentine Day Massacre, in which members of a rival gang were brutally slain by thugs posing as police officials. Al Capone had severe syphilis by the time he was freed from Alcatraz jail in 1939, and he had registered under the alias Mr. Martini at a Baltimore hospital. When the media quickly learned that Mr. Martini was the infamous Chicago mobster, the physicians pretended that he was suffering from a nervous system issue. Syphilis did not improve the declining health of Mr. Martini, sometimes known as Mr. Scarface. Prior to his death from a heart attack, his obituary noted that he had paresis, a mental illness that can be triggered by syphilis. Heart attacks are known to be caused by syphilis, which could have contributed to this one. Tula Bankhead, an actress, possessed gonorrhea. Tula Bankhead was born into Southern nobility and had a tendency to attract attention, especially because of her appearance, even though her parents raised her in a strict manner. In 1918, at the age of 16, she started performing. Her beauty and rich baritone voice helped establish an unstoppable stage presence, even though she had no professional training. As an actor, she traveled widely and gained notoriety for her scandalous on- and off-stage behavior. She had several romantic relationships and would sometimes appear on stage in nothing but her underwear, even when the script didn't call for it. The starlet's drug and alcohol abuse caused her health to deteriorate by the time she was in her 40s, which was a price for her indulgent lifestyle. She also got gonorrhea, which was perhaps to be expected considering her lavish way of living. It had advanced so far by the time it was found that she needed an emergency hysterectomy. Regarding the illness, she famously said, "Don't think this has taught me a lesson." Nevertheless, she kept acting in films and TV shows, such as the Batman series and Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat. She was well known for her licentious lifestyle as well as her charitable endeavors, which included aiding underprivileged foster children. Scott Joplin had syphilis. Composer Scott Joplin, known as the King of Ragtime, was an expert in the jazz-influenced style that is distinguished by syncopation, intricate bass lines, and odd-sounding stop times. He was able to establish his reputation among both black and white artists and music enthusiasts during the period of his life, which spanned from 1867 to 1917, when African Americans were subjected to very harsh treatment. After studying music in Missouri, Scott Joplin, who was born and raised in Texas, made his stage debut in 1893 at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. In 1907, he made the trip to New York, where he carried on writing and releasing music. Many of his works are still performed and enjoyed today, such as Maple Leaf Rag and The Entertainer. A serious ailment known as dementia paralytica caused Joplin's mental and physical faculties to entirely collapse in 1916, the year before he passed away. He lost all ability to take care of himself and destroyed a lot of his manuscripts in episodes of madness and fury. He was then placed in an institution, but the medical staff was overburdened with patients and lacked the means to assist them. Joplin passed away soon after. He had most likely had syphilis for 20 years by the time he fell ill. John Dillinger had gonorrhea gangster. John Dillinger embarked on a crime spree that covered a large portion of the continental United States, while Al Capone was incarcerated at Alcatraz for tax evasion. He entered the Navy after being born in 1903, but he quickly left and spent the majority of his life on the run. In order to maintain his 16-year-old wife and himself, Dillinger turned to criminal Ed Singleton. After being apprehended after robbing a grocery store, he became a seasoned criminal and eventually rose to the top of the FBI. After he was freed, he and his group looted banks, freed prisoners from jails, and even took police officers' rifles and Kevlar vests. The head of the FBI at the time, J. Edgar Hoover, tasked a special squad with capturing Dillinger. He was slain by FBI agents in a gunfight. Dillinger was diagnosed with gonorrhea in 1924, the year he was initially committed to prison. Painful injections directly into his penis were the only form of treatment he received during his 6-year prison sentence. This undoubtedly did little to correct the disease and only served to deepen his disdain for the American legal system. There's a chance he attempted to escape, and his misbehavior resulted in an additional year of imprisonment. Confederate General Ambrose Powell Hill, Jr. had gonorrhea. During the Mexican-American War, Ambrose Powell Hill, Jr., also referred to as A.P. Hill, started to gain notoriety in American military history. Being a native of Culpeper, Virginia, he had allegiances to the newly established Confederate States of America at the time of the state's secession. He enlisted in the Confederate Army and advanced through the ranks to the rank of general without much delay. He commanded a division known as the Light Division, so called because of their rapid movement, and shown resolute leadership in the Second Battle of Bull Run and the Battle of Fredericksburg. While attending West Point to study, Hill became infected with gonorrhea. Ironically, he was pals with future Union General George McClellan. His condition caused him to miss so many classes that he had to retake his third year. Given that Hill's inflamed genitalia rendered him ineffectual at the Battle of Gettysburg and other lesser engagements, it is possible that his gonorrhea contributed to the Confederates' defeat in the Civil War. Throughout the Civil War, he would experience episodes of illness that would keep him out of commission and necessitate the appointment of new leaders for his unit. He died at the Third Battle of Petersburg just a week before the war ended, and General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. Occultist Alistar Crowley had syphilis and gonorrhea. Edward Alexander Crowley, better known as Alistar Crowley, was a well-known occultist from Britain who took the mark 666 and declared himself to be the beast mentioned in the Book of Revelation. Despite being raised as a Christian, Crowley disapproved of organized religion and developed a fascination with the occult, especially the Rosicrucians, an esoteric organization. During World War I, he visited America and produced propaganda for Italy and Germany. In the 1930s, Crowley went back to Britain, where he lived a penniless and filthy life. However, following his passing, he rose to cult status, especially within the Thelema religion, which he created and professed to be a prophet. He is acknowledged as the author of the Book of Satan as well. Some still see him as the most horrible man to have ever lived. Crowley claimed to have caught gonorrhea from a prostitute in Glasgow, Scotland, while he was a student at Tunbridge School in England. This idea resulted in his expulsion from the esteemed institution. His association with prostitutes during his time at Cambridge University resulted in him catching syphilis as well. The ailments may have contributed to mental illness and delusions, but it is unknown what impact they had on his general health and well-being.
Scottish biographer James Boswell had gonorrhea. Scots are well known for having known James Boswell, 1740–1795, as their national biographer of Dr. Samuel Johnson, the renowned British author. He had a history of anxiousness, despair, and sadness during his early years. Some of these conditions may have run in his family. He wanted to be a writer and was surrounded by wealthy and prestigious societies from birth, yet he struggled with mental illness and loneliness. His upbringing as an austere Calvinist by his mother, and his dislike of the literary and dramatic arts by his father, may have contributed to his many escapades with prostitutes in his youth and adulthood. He contracted a venereal disease throughout his stay in London, starting from the first time he saw a prostitute. Given that he meticulously documented all of his consultations in his diary, it is likely that he did not learn his lesson. He went on to experience at least 19 bouts of gonorrhea, which most likely had little effect on the loneliness and mental anguish that had dogged him since he was a little child. His wife would apply a poultice to his genitalia every night, noticing their enlarged size as a result of a venereal condition. What lesson does the narrative teach us? Children are resourceful and will find a way out of a difficult upbringing, even if it means facing catastrophe. That's it for today. Remember to support, please subscribe.